So this is what they call their National Infrastructure Report. So they're going to develop a geological repository, an informed and willing community, $16 to $24 billion for their national infrastructure project. They'll put the waste, so they're going to spend 10 years looking for the site. This is what it looks like. Very, very similar. Same graphic designer, I think, as Atomic Energy of Canada Limited had, because it's very similar. And so basically, you find a place. Now, I don't think it's going to be on a farm field somewhere, but you find a beautiful location, and then you go down 500 to 1,000 meters, and you have some caverns, and you'll put a copper canister. That's the other difference from the ACL concept. They could have gone with copper or titanium. NWMO, they're firm, it's going to be copper. Never mind that the recent studies show real problems with copper corrosion, so they might still switch their mind there. So, some key concerns. It's really the nuclear industry is looking for a yes. This is about getting to a yes, and they will use this so-called solution as an argument for continued production. Economically vulnerable communities are the ones who are most likely to step forward, and the process will be extremely divisive. We've been through a number of these processes in our region before over low-level radioactive waste, Toronto garbage, PCBs, biomedical waste. It's extremely destructive in a community. And if there ever was an eventual repository, then we would have all the problems with impacts on the environment. Plus, along the transportation route, there will be both social concerns and there will be physical effects, harmful effects. So where they're at right now, they launched the siting process in 2007, they finished it in 2009, and they actually started their site search in May of this year. And they've got a 9-year process. They start off with their step one is a broadcast. They're just going to go out and talk to everybody. We thought they were going to do that much more publicly than they are. In fact, they're doing it very privately, mostly through the municipalities. They've set up a municipal forum that they boast of on their website, but they won't say who's on it, when it meets, how it meets. There's no records of the meetings. It's a more informal process, they now say, in response to a request for information about it. And so step one is broadcast. Then step two is an initial review, which basically is just a test to see if the community has the authority. They're working only with what they call accountable authorities, municipalities. The province will act on behalf of any unorganized townships. Then step three is a preliminary review. Step four, and that'll take a couple of years. And then step four is the first time they look at surrounding communities. By step five, they're starting to negotiate, lock the communities in, and it's not till step seven, I think, it's not till step 8 that they actually do the environmental assessment. So at step 5, they lock the communities in. Step 8, they do the environmental assessment. Step 9, construct, build, fill. So those are the steps. So where we're at right now, we have 3 communities that have stepped forward and that are somewhere between step 1 and step 2. I think they're in step 2, but the NWMO won't really say. So it's Pine House in northern Saskatchewan, up in that Athabasca region, fairly close to Key Lake Mine, Métis community, surrounded by the nuclear industry already. Igna's, small community in northwestern Ontario. Mill went out in the economic turndown for the forest industry. Ear Falls, also northwestern Ontario. Coincidentally, the mill also went out in Ear Falls. So those are the communities that they've got to step forward so far. The NWMO only acknowledges when there's something in the media, and they won't disclose who they're talking to and what other communities might consider going forward. They think the communities need the privacy to make these decisions themselves, so they don't want to say who else they're talking to. So where we're at right now in response is developing resources for community level response, establishing some local, regional, national networks, and doing workshops and information sessions, mostly in the northeastern Ontario, some in the northwest. And our intention really as an organization, as Northwatch, is to not have leave these communities to walk alone. We have a large network of folks across the country. Gordon's already been in to talk to people in Thunder Bay near Ignis and Ignis itself. So we really need to travel with them, and we really need to organize against the NWMO's overtures at every step of the way. Thank you.
This is quite a mystery to most people because they haven't studied science, or in particular nuclear science. Politicians too, by the way. It's important to realize that most politicians are not scientifically trained, and as a result they're very vulnerable to the same kind of mystification that you and I undergo. They don't really understand this stuff. And so their attitude is, let's leave it to the experts, and the experts happen to be the people in the nuclear industry. So the nuclear industry has been very successful in creating what you might call a state within a state, whereby they really run the show. And the government really turns to the nuclear industry in most cases and says, what should we do? And the industry tells them. Now, this nuclear waste management organization is a creature of the industry. It is the nuclear industry. It's not a government agency which is independent of the industry, which is what the Seaborne Commission unanimously recommended. You know, Brennain was talking about the 10-year process of environmental assessment. Well, the panel, the Seaborne panel, although they were divided on the question of how safe exactly this concept was, they were unanimous in saying that there should be an agency which is completely independent of the nuclear industry. And the Chrétien government did exactly the opposite. They said they just put it right on the lap of the nuclear industry. Now the problem is that there's a fundamental conflict of interest there. And as long as you leave the nuclear industry to run its own affairs and to regulate itself and to judge for itself what's good and what's bad, then it's totally undemocratic. And that's the way they like it. They don't like it to be democratic. In fact, democracy, they're kind of allergic. They break out in a rash. You know, we may be allergic to radiation, but they're allergic to democracy. What they're concerned now is not of radiation leaks, but information leaks. That's what is really toxic for them. So
we're going to go to 3 o'clock, okay? You got 15 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the environmental footprint because Bruce Power is currently planning to ship 1,600 tons of radioactive waste through the Great Lakes and through the St. Lawrence Seaway and over to Sweden so that this stuff can be melted down and sold as scrap metal so that it can be turned into knives, forks, spoons, safety pins, you know, anything made of metal. And it'll go all over the world. So this is, you know, you've heard the expression dilution is the solution to pollution. Well, we're getting into a realm where you could say delusion is the solution to pollution. Because this is just an incredible delusion where they call it recycling. Now the industry, the nuclear industry has a very good job of coining phrases which have no scientific meaning, but which sound good. And they also corrupt words which have a good meaning originally. For example, when they talk about disposal of nuclear waste, there's absolutely no scientific definition of disposal. If you ask anybody in the nuclear industry or anywhere else to give you a scientific definition of disposal, it does not exist. Because the human race has never disposed of anything. And the human race, what we've experienced is that nature recycles everything, and that the only chance we have of getting rid of toxic materials is either to destroy them or to somehow hope that after a certain period of time they will have disassembled and gone back into, like us, our bodies. You know, our bodies go back into good soil. Well, that doesn't happen with radioactive materials. They're indestructible, other than the fact that they transform themselves over a period of time. So I want to talk about the environmental footprint because Bruce Power has justified their current plans by saying they want to reduce their environmental footprint. And they're going to do this by sending it to Sweden and getting 90% of it recycled into consumer goods, and then they only get back 10%, and they say, look, I've reduced my environmental footprint. I was interviewed by a radio personality recently, and he said, isn't that a good idea? And I said, well, you know, I could reduce my environmental footprint too. I'll take my garbage can, I'll go around the neighborhood, put a little garbage on everybody's lawn, and by the time I get back to where I started, I've reduced my environmental footprint. That's basically what's going on here. They're just spreading the wealth, sharing the wealth. Let everybody have a little bit of radiation. So good for you. So I'd just like to say, first of all, that it all starts with uranium. Uranium is the key element for all nuclear technology, both nuclear weapons and peaceful applications of nuclear power, so-called. And the difficulty is that we don't really know how to drive a wedge between those two things, because in fact, much of the technology, much of the materials that are used for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy are exactly the knowledge and the materials you need to develop nuclear weapons as well. So in fact, they're sort of like Siamese twins, joined at the hip. Now, what Brennain was showing you before was a list of radioactive materials which are actually naturally produced under the ground where the uranium is stored by nature. And they're called the uranium decay products. And here they are. This is the same list that Brennain was showing you. That's uranium-238 at the top. What happens is these radioactive materials, they have unstable atoms, and the atoms disintegrate. And when they disintegrate, that's when they give off radiation. So when they talk about atomic radiation, it's kind of like a little burst of energy which consists of particles as well as energy. And when that happens, the uranium atom changes into a different kind of atom, which is also radioactive. And then that changes into another one, which is also radioactive. This one down here, for example, has a half-life of 76,000 years. It's thorium-230. That's a byproduct of uranium. And you've all heard of radium, probably. Radium is quite a dangerous material. That's a byproduct of uranium. Radon gas, every atom of radon gas in the entire world started off as an atom of uranium. So when you hear about the dangers of radon gas, that's just one of the many byproducts of uranium. Down here we have polonium-210. By the way, both radium and polonium were discovered by Marie Curie back in 1898 when she chemically extracted these things. Polonium-210 is one of the most, well, it is, I think, the most toxic material on the face of the Earth. This is a material that was used to murder the man Alexander Litvinenko some years ago in London, England, a small amount in his tea. And it's considered by the Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory, says it's 250 billion times more toxic than cyanide. So it's extremely toxic. Now all of that stuff is produced by nature underground in the uranium deposits. The difficulty is that when the uranium company comes along and takes away the uranium, all they take away is that. And this is what's left behind. So that the most dangerous materials, which these by the way are much more dangerous than the uranium itself, the radium, the radon, the polonium, the radioactive lead-210, all of these things are left behind. And because thorium-230 has a 76,000-year half-life, they continue to be regenerated over a period of hundreds of thousands of years. 76,000 years is just the time it takes for the quantity to reduce by 1/2. Then it reduces by half of that, and then by half of that, and then by half of that. So this goes on 760,000 years is nothing. You know, that's just 10 half-lives. It's still dangerous after that too. So that's why it becomes a perpetual legacy. Now, that's at the front end of the fuel cycle. That's where the uranium mines are. That's the problems that the miners, that the mill workers, and that the tailings that are left behind, the waste rock that was talked about here. That all has to do with those materials. But when the uranium is put inside a reactor, then something else happens. Because those uranium atoms, and this is what makes uranium different from any other material naturally occurring on Earth, is the only substance which can be used to generate large amounts of energy by a different process called fission. This is splitting the uranium atoms. Now when the uranium atoms are split, you get not just dozens, but hundreds of new radioactive materials which do not exist in nature at all, not like the uranium decay products. These are brand new substances, and there's at least 300 of them. And they are millions of times more radioactive than the uranium itself. Millions of times more radioactive. And unlike the decay products, which don't give off very much penetrating radiation, but which give off a lot of internal radiation, non-penetrating radiation, this stuff gives off penetrating radiation that'll kill you in seconds at a distance of 1 meter. That stuff, when it comes out of the reactor, is literally millions of times more dangerous than it went in, and it'll remain so for a long time. Now, something else happens inside the reactor.